His name was Lucius. He was only 10 years old when Roman soldiers stormed his village and tore him away from his mother's arms. His crime? Being beautiful, in a world where beauty was currency, and children were not always seen as human. Under the reign of Emperor Caligula, Rome became a playground for cruelty dressed as ceremony, and power cloaked in perversion. Lucius wasn't captured to work the fields, or to serve wine in noble homes. He was chosen for something far more intimate, and far more horrifying. In secret halls beneath marble villas, where senators laughed too loud and drank too much, he was taught not to read, but to obey. Not to think, but to please. If you believe the darkest truths of history must be told, hit subscribe, because this story was buried for nearly 2,000 years. And no empire wants it trending again. Asterisk the village of Lutetia, just beyond the shadow of Roman-controlled Gaul, had learned to live quietly. Its people were simple farmers, herders, mothers who sang lullabies near the hearth, and boys who still believed in the stars. Among them was Lucius, a 10-year-old boy with golden curls and pale, unblemished skin, who still ran barefoot through the pastures without fear. That morning, the ground shook lightly. It wasn't thunder. It was hooves, Roman hooves. The legion had returned, not for war this time, but for a different kind of conquest. Lucius's mother, Aurelia, pulled him inside their thatched hut, her hands trembling. "Stay hidden," she whispered, her voice cracking. She knew the rumors. The emperor wanted new faces, delicate ones. The imperial agents traveled with artists who judged children like livestock at auction. Beauty had become a sentence. The door burst open not with rage, but with casual authority. A Roman officer stepped in, looked around, and found the boy. Lucius didn't cry. He didn't understand. He only stared, confused, at the man in armor who measured his cheekbones with his eyes. "This one," the officer said coldly. "Put him with the others." The others were 6 more children, all boys, all under 12, chosen, labeled, not as humans, but as offerings. 3 weeks later, Lucius arrived in Rome, the capital of the world, bound in a cart covered with velvet curtains. He wasn't dirty, beaten, or bloodied. In fact, he was bathed daily, perfumed, and fed better than most Roman citizens. But he wasn't free. He was taken not to a market, but to a villa, a white, towering estate on the edge of the Palatine Hill, owned by Senator Quintus Metellus, a close friend of Emperor Caligula. It was there that the training began. Lucius was stripped and clothed in a light tunic of silk. He was introduced to an older boy named Cassian, perhaps 13, who had already graduated. "You smile when they smile," Cassian said coldly, grooming Lucius's hair with oil. "You don't speak unless asked, and you never, ever say no." Lucius looked at him, terrified. "What do they want?" Cassian didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a gold medallion into Lucius's palm. It bore the face of Caligula. "That's the man who owns your breath now." That evening, the senators arrived, old men in golden togas, perfumed and drunk before sundown. Lucius was told to stand quietly in the center of a marble courtyard filled with musicians, torches, and murmured laughter. The boys were paraded like dancers, but no one danced. One senator, his teeth stained with wine, bent toward Lucius and whispered in his ear, "Don't worry. You're going to make a lot of very important men very happy." Lucius wanted to run. He looked at the stone walls, at the guards, at Cassian, who had gone silent, eyes fixed forward like a statue. There was no escape. Not in Rome. The sound of footsteps echoed from the back corridor. Someone important had just entered the room. And then Lucius heard it for the first time. Laughter unlike the rest. High-pitched, erratic, and cruel. The emperor had arrived. The moment Emperor Caligula entered the villa, Silence fell. Not the respectful silence owed to a ruler, but the uneasy, breath-holding quiet that predators inspire. He was barely in his mid-20s, draped in violet silk and polished gold, his expression somewhere between euphoria and cruelty. Lucius had never seen a man wear so much jewelry. The boy's heart pounded. Caligula's gaze swept over the room, not to address senators or hear petitions, but to look at them, the boys, as if inspecting a collection. His eyes stopped on Lucius, who instinctively lowered his head. The emperor walked forward slowly, his sandals brushing the marble with measured calm. "This one's new," Caligula said softly, placing 2 fingers under Lucius's chin, lifting it. "What's your name?" Lucius hesitated, eyes wide. A quick slap on the back of his neck from a nearby handler reminded him. "Lucius." Caligula smiled. "Delicate bones, he'll do." That was how it began. Lucius was taken that night to a separate wing of the villa, one the senators never entered. The halls were quieter there, but colder, more calculated. Every boy had a chamber, not a prison cell. A decorated room with velvet curtains, incense, cushions, mirrors, and no locks on the doors, because they weren't expected to try escaping. For the next weeks, Lucius was trained, not with books, not with discipline, with performance. A Greek tutor named Minister, himself a former concubine in his youth, led the sessions. He taught the boys how to walk gracefully, how to bathe one another in fragrant oils, how to serve wine with lowered eyes. But most disturbingly, he taught them how to interpret desire, how to smile when someone approached, how to make themselves appear willing, even when they were not. "This is Rome," Minister once told them, pacing between their beds. "You are not boys anymore. You are pleasures, gifts, symbols, and symbols don't speak unless spoken to." Lucius didn't cry anymore. The tears had stopped on the 3rd night, when Cassian silently held his hand in the dark. Cassian didn't speak either, but sometimes, when the others slept, he would hum old folk songs in Latin, lullabies that their mothers might have sung. Lucius would grip his medallion, the one with Caligula's face, and whisper to himself, "It's just a dream. I'll wake up." But Rome didn't wake you up. Rome swallowed you whole. One evening, during a private banquet, Senator Quintus approached Minister with a new request. "The emperor will visit again tomorrow," he said. Lucius should be prepared for something more ... ceremonial. Minister nodded without expression. He knew what that meant. Cassian overheard, and later that night pulled Lucius aside. "They're going to dress you in gold," Cassian said. "They do that before they let the emperor choose again." Lucius swallowed hard. "Choose?" Cassian looked away. "He likes to test loyalty. Sometimes in front of everyone." Lucius's chest tightened. "What if I say no?" Cassian looked him in the eyes, for the first time with panic. "You never say no." The next morning, Lucius was bathed, perfumed, and dressed in thin gold-dyed cloth that shimmered against his pale skin. He felt like a statue being prepared for sacrifice. Minister whispered to him before he stepped out, "Be still, be graceful, be quiet." Lucius entered the candlelit hall, where Caligula waited on a reclined couch, surrounded by fruits, musicians, and wine. The emperor raised his cup lazily and smirked. "Ah, my golden boy has arrived." Lucius froze. And then Caligula spoke again, softly, but with an edge. "Come closer. Let's see what you've learned." Lucius stood frozen at the edge of the room. He could hear the rustling of silks, the quiet laughter of the senators, the faint plucking of a harp in the corner, and above it all, the voice of Caligula, sharp as polished bronze and twice as cold. "Come, little one," the emperor said again, more firmly. "Show us what the gods sent us." Lucius stepped forward, the golden-dyed cloth brushing against his ankles, his bare feet silent on the marble. He tried to slow his breathing, to copy the movements Minister had taught him. Grace, stillness, poise. But every step toward that couch felt like walking off a cliff. Caligula reclined like a serpent in a throne of silk, his eyes drinking in every detail. "He walks like a statue," the emperor said with a smirk. "They trained this one well." Lucius stopped where? He had been told 3 feet in front of the emperor. He lowered his head. He did not speak. A senator chuckled, tipsy with wine. "Does he sing too?" "Not yet," Caligula said, motioning with his hand. "But we can always teach him." Then the room went silent again. Caligula reached forward and gently ran his fingers across Lucius's shoulder. The boy did not flinch, not visibly. He remembered Minister's warning. "Recoil, and you insult the gods. Smile, and you survive." So he smiled, a faint mechanical curve of the lips. That was all. And that was enough. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Lucius was made to serve wine, kneel beside the couch, pour oils into golden bowls, and light incense. He was not touched again, not publicly. But the way the emperor's eyes followed him across the room, how the senators whispered to one another, how the servants avoided meeting his gaze. Lucius knew what had begun. He was no longer invisible. He had been claimed. Later that night, in the silence of the boys' wing, Lucius sat in his chamber, shaking. Cassian entered without a word and sat beside him. "You did well," he whispered, brushing a leaf from Lucius's hair. "I didn't do anything," Lucius replied. "Exactly," Cassian said. "That's what they want." Lucius looked at him. "Will he take me again?" Cassian didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next few weeks blurred into routine. Lucius was summoned often, not always to Caligula directly, but to gatherings where he was placed like an ornament, to be watched, complimented, passed over like a fine piece of silver. He was now the golden boy. The senators spoke of him as if he weren't present. They made jokes, drank to his beauty, wagered on how long he would last. But what haunted Lucius most wasn't the gazes or the whispers. It was what he felt disappearing. At first, it was small. He stopped dreaming of his village. He stopped picturing his mother's voice. Then he stopped flinching. Then he stopped feeling much at all. The numbness was creeping in, a quiet survival instinct, as if his soul were folding inward to hide from the empire that had consumed his body. One afternoon, Minister summoned him with urgency. "The emperor has sent word," he said. "There is to be a private performance at the imperial palace. Only 3 boys have been chosen. You are one of them." Lucius's hands trembled. Cassian, overhearing from the corridor, stepped inside. His eyes were different now, sharper, darker. "If he's called you to the palace," Cassian said slowly, "there's no pretending anymore." Lucius met his gaze. "What happens there?" Cassian leaned in, his voice no longer a whisper, but a warning. "You don't come back the same." The carriage that carried Lucius to the imperial palace was silent and sealed. No windows. Just the faint scent of rose oil clinging to the cushions, and the ache of dread growing inside his chest. He sat still, hands folded, trying not to shake. He was dressed in fine crimson linen, trimmed with gold thread, clothing meant to impress, not protect. The city roared beyond the walls, cheers from the arena, shouts from the forum, the chaos of Rome continuing as if nothing in its heart was broken. No one knew where he was going, or what he would become. When the doors opened, Lucius blinked at the flood of golden light. The Palatium Augusti, once home to Augustus himself, now belonged to a man who turned ceremony into cruelty. A dozen guards in gleaming armor flanked the gates. One of them, barely older than Cassian, gave Lucius a brief glance, not of pity, but of recognition. He had seen other boys walk through those doors. None of them had smiled. Inside, the air was heavy with incense. The halls shimmered with mosaics of naked gods, orgiastic feasts, beasts and men merged in impossible scenes. The ceiling glowed from golden candelabras. Slaves moved silently along the edges, never making eye contact. Lucius was led through 3 atriums, across a garden, and into a domed chamber veiled in crimson drapes. There, waiting on a platform of cushions and wine-stained marble, was Caligula. The emperor reclined lazily, a lion cub curled at his feet. A crown of laurel tilted over his brow. He looked younger than Lucius remembered, or maybe just more dangerous. To his left were 2 other boys, one with dark curls, the other pale and expressionless. Neither spoke. They didn't look at Lucius. "You've come," Caligula said, sipping from a goblet. "And you're even more perfect in red." Lucius bowed his head. His legs felt numb, his mouth dry. His mind screamed, but his body remembered the performance. The ceremony began with music, soft lyres and flutes from behind the curtains. A senator entered, then another, and another. 12 in total. They sat in silence, not like officials, but like spectators. Minister stood nearby, his face unreadable. Cassian was nowhere in sight. Lucius was motioned forward. The floor was warm beneath his feet, the room too quiet. "Today," Caligula announced, "we celebrate the gods of beauty, of desire, of obedience." His voice rang like theater. "Let Rome see what true loyalty looks like." Lucius stood center stage, between cushions and men who smelled of oil and wine. He could feel their eyes on his skin. He wasn't meant to speak, just to exist, to be pleasing, to be still. And then Caligula stepped down from his platform. He walked around Lucius in a slow circle. "Do you know what makes you powerful?" he whispered. Lucius dared not answer. Caligula smiled and leaned closer, lips brushing his ear. "The fact that you have no power at all. What happened that night was ritual. Not a celebration, not a banquet. It was theater for men who had forgotten the meaning of virtue, and for an emperor who believed he was a god. Lucius performed, exactly as he'd been trained. No tears, no mistakes, no hesitation. When it ended, he was escorted to a private chamber. Not his usual one. This had no windows, no cushions, just silence. He sat on the cold floor, staring at nothing, his red tunic wrinkled and stained. He didn't feel like a boy. He didn't feel human. Just as he began to close his eyes, the door creaked open. It was Cassian. He stepped inside slowly and knelt beside him. "I warned you," he whispered. "You don't come back the same." Lucius looked at him, but didn't speak, because he knew now he never would. The next morning, the sun rose over Rome like it did every day, golden, unapologetic, and indifferent. But something in Lucius had shifted. Not just the way he walked, or the way his eyes no longer lingered on the world around him. Something deeper, something fundamental. A thread inside him had snapped quietly in the night. He woke in the same chamber, though he hadn't really slept. His crimson tunic was gone, replaced by a pale blue robe. Cassian had stayed nearby, sitting with his back against the wall, awake the entire night. "Today," Cassian said softly, "they'll either send you back to the villa ... or they won't." Lucius turned to look at him. "What does that mean?" Cassian didn't answer right away. Then he sighed, voice low. "It means you've been seen, used, displayed. That's all they wanted. Now you're either forgotten ... or favored." Lucius looked down at his hands. They were shaking again, but not from fear. From rage. "I hate him," he whispered. Cassian's gaze hardened. You can't. Hating him gives him more of you. Lucius stood slowly. He already took everything. Cassian rose too. For the first time, he reached into his tunic and pulled something from a leather pouch. A thin bronze coin. It was worn, the face almost rubbed away. This belonged to my brother, he said. They took him first. I carry this so I don't forget who I was before they made me into ... this. He pressed it into Lucius's hand. Don't lose yourself. Lucius, that's how they win. Hours later, Lucius was brought back to the emperor's private garden, but this time it was empty. No music, no senators. Just Caligula, standing by a fountain shaped like a swan, tossing pomegranate seeds into the water . He didn't smile when Lucius arrived. He didn't even look at him at first. You performed well, the emperor said, almost absently. The Senate was entertained, and the gods, I think, were pleased. Lucius remained silent. Caligula finally turned to him. You've been given a choice, Lucius blinked. A choice? You can return to the villa, serve the Senate, continue. You our role. He paused, stepping closer. Or you can remain here, with me. You'll have silk, jewels, private chambers. You'll never be touched by another again, unless I allow it. Lucius looked at him. This man, this god in his own mind, who spoke of abuse as privilege. What if I say no? He asked quietly. Caligula chuckled. Then you go back and disappear into the marble. Lucius hesitated. And if I stay? Caligula's smile widened. You become eternal. That night, Lucius was returned to the villa, but not to the boy's wing. He was placed in a private room, draped in imperial silks, given trays of figs and honey, attended to by silent slaves who wouldn't meet his eyes. No one told him what to do. No one touched him. No one said why he. Was there ... He waited ... and waited ... for 2 days. On the third night, Cassian entered without knocking. His face was pale, his eyes frantic. You need to leave? He whispered. Now. Lucius sat up. Why? Caligula's been wounded. There was an attempt on his life. Some say he's dead. Others say it was staged. The palace is in chaos. If he survives, he'll start cleansing the halls. And we're part of the filth. Lucius didn't hesitate. He took only what he could carry. A robe, the bronze coin Cassian had given him, and a slice of bread wrapped in cloth. Together, they slipped into the servant corridors beneath the villa. Rome was burning with whispers. The streets were tense, guards confused. The empire, for the first time in years, had no voice at the center. Caligula, the god who couldn't die, might finally have bled. They made it as far as Ostia, the port city. There, among the cargo ships and fishmongers, Cassian found a merchant traveling east. He didn't ask questions. He saw in Lucius's eyes the same look he had seen in dozens of others, the look of a soul trying to live. They paid with a single golden bracelet Cassian had hidden for years. On the boat, as Rome vanished behind the horizon, Cassian stood beside. Lucius, wrapped in a salt-stained cloak. You know he'll be remembered, Lucius said. Statues, scrolls. History will call him divine. Cassian looked out at the sea. Then we remember something else. We remember who he really was. Lucius touched the coin in his hand. The one with no emperor's face. Just worn bronze. Just memory. Years later, in a small town along the Aegean coast, a man named Lucius would grow herbs, heal wounds, teach letters to village boys. When asked why he never married, he would only smile and say, some of us are here to protect. Innocence, not take it. He would keep a small coin on a string near his bed, and he would never again speak the name of the man who stole his childhood, because some memories, even when survived, are better left in the shadows of marble.